Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video. And in today's video, I'll be taking a look at the last of my recent Michael May knives, and this is a classic Sheffield Lambfoot, or Lambsfoot, depending on what you prefer. And here is the knife. It's in a very unique handle material. Now this may appear to be wood, and technically it is, but this is black palm. Now, black palm on a technical level is apparently from the same family as grass and bamboo, therefore not making it a typical wood. But it's a very interesting handle, and it's very, very beautiful. The camera cannot do it justice, but I'll take a quick look at this knife and go through my thoughts on it. I will start off by saying this is perhaps my most mixed Michael May knife. Now, I have discussed quite a few in the past, and this was perhaps the hardest one to do, because I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to approach a knife such as this, as there are some aspects of it that are absolutely outstanding, and others that are unfortunately quite hard to excuse. So, get into that in a moment. Let's start off by having a look at the knife. It's a typical sway back handle shape. You can see there. We have our typically polished brass bolster here, which is longer than what I would say is normal for a bolster, almost approaching Barlow levels of elongation. Nice pinch at the top, which lends itself well to the lines of the knife. We have brass pins, brass liners, and a spring that I have been told is made of 420 HC. And 420 HC, of course, for those who have ever purchased buck knives or case knives, 420 HC is a very common steel used by both brands. Of course, Case calls theirs True Sharp surgical steel, but it's very much a similar composition as 420 HC. But we have our lovely file work here, which is well done as always. I have one other Lambfoot by Michael, and this one is a plain back, which, well, is quite bland in comparison. I don't dislike the plain back, but I will say I prefer the extra bit of work that is put into these models. But we have fairly even grind on the bolsters. Let's see how well that can focus. It looks a little bit off maybe to this side, but in terms of overall grind, I can't really fault it. And there's the blade. And I will get into this in just a second. But first and foremost, for those impatient, let's open the knife here. We have a nail nick, but there's almost enough to pinch open. Not quite. Not comfortably, at least. So I would recommend using the nail nick. The pull weight on this was ridiculously stiff when new. I'd say it was easily a 9, but now it's probably broken into more of an 8. And I will say, personally, that is acceptable to me. I know some people prefer a very tight spring and would be perfectly fine with that, but there are others that may find it uncomfortable, and so I will say that I'm probably used to tougher springs, and so for that reason, an 8 to me may be acceptable, but to someone else, it very well may not be. But at least you know that the blade is held securely open. Speaking of which, we have a Lambfoot or Lambsfoot profile blade here. You can see there's a bit of a thin layer of oil on it, as this is an O1 carbon steel blade. O1 is, of course, a tool steel that I've discussed in the past. Michael uses it on quite a few of his knives, and it tends to have a higher Rockwell hardness than, say, C70, 1095, C75, and the like. This leads it to being a bit tougher and more resilient. It holds an edge for longer than a typical C75-esque carbon steel, but in the process is a bit tougher to sharpen. So keep that in mind. It will also patina with use. But you have your traditional Lambfoot profile here with the straight edge. One thing that you may notice is, particularly up at the front of the blade, it does seem to curve up a little bit. That is not intentional. I would say that is just a bit of a slip in the sharpening. So I would not say that is normal. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a flaw, but it isn't perfectly symmetrical. Here's the other side. And one thing I did notice about this knife that I quite like is the fact that, unlike many of Michael's knives, this is swedged on either side. In the case of my other Michael May Lambfoot, or Lambsfoot, you can see this one is heavily patinaed, as this has been used quite a lot. It's probably my most used Michael May knife. You can see that there is the swedge on the front side, but nothing on the back. And I always figured this was some form of strange trademark on Michael's part, but I think it's a little strange to me. I don't really dislike it, but it does seem odd how they're not mirrored. However, on this one, you can see there is the swedge on the front side and on the back. And I very much appreciate that, as I like having symmetry when it can be done, and having a mirrored, matched swedge like this just looks nicer to me. And I understand it's no requirement and you can have a blade without a swedge, but if you're going to add one in the first place, put it on both sides. But I hope this becomes a continuous tradition with Michael, as I prefer the look, personally. There you are. You have your swedge up there. It is very, very sharp, admittedly, even if the grind isn't the most even. The knife came paper cutting sharp out of the box, maybe within the realm of shaving sharp. Maybe could use a bit of a touch-up first, but very sharp tip as well on this one. That I cannot complain about. Of course, you have the stamp, which I will showcase. You do have to close the blade halfway to see it fully, but stamping is clear. It says M. May, Sheffield, England. The only thing I guess I could complain about is the latter part of England. It looks like it's cutting off at the very end. So I could be nitpicky about that, but I don't see a need in doing that. But blade locks open very securely, no blade play in any direction, and the transition from the spring to the blade is absolutely excellent. You can see there's just that little line there, and everything is beautifully smooth. This also applies to the knife in the closed position. Just very, very well done. And speaking of well done, I will discuss another thing I'm very happy about with this knife. Also, don't know if I mentioned this, the edge doesn't have any warping in it. It's quite straight. Oh, maybe there's a tiny bend off to the right at the very end there. Can't be entirely sure if that's just my eyes, but definitely a decent job overall. The blade looks fairly good. Not sure if there's a bend there, so I won't declare that an issue, but I could be mistaken. But the one thing that is perfect on this knife, there is no gapping whatsoever. I know it can't really be shown here, but when I hold this up to the light, absolutely nothing shines through. And typically, it may seem like there's very little gapping on a knife, but when you hold it up to the light, you can see those little bits shining through, and that can be, well, it can be a bit eye-opening. Personally, I think if you need to hold the knife up to the light to see the gapping, it's not a big deal, but sometimes it will reveal flaws that you may have not seen. For example, on this Ettrick, holding it up to the light, there's a little bit of gapping right here. Don't know how well that can be shown. There's a tiny bit of gapping. However, on this piece, absolutely nothing. This back is seamless. I can't fault Michael in any way for this. This is just immaculate. And had there been some small little gaps, I wouldn't have cared, but it just goes to show that while maybe inconsistent, Michael is capable of perfection in some aspects. But this is just beautifully done. Also, the spring cutoff is fairly good. Maybe, actually that is quite even, things considered. And of course there is the stop pin. Now, addressing the elephant in the room. With this knife, there are two main flaws. One I would consider a bit more of a nitpick, and the other I would consider a genuine criticism. You can take both into account, and perhaps you may have found some things on this knife that I haven't noticed, or I did notice but didn't seem to mind, whereas they really bothered you. That's fine, but the two things I would like to bring to your attention. First and foremost is this. Now, I don't think I need to exactly describe what that is, but I will do so anyways. The blade is quite clearly off to one side. And that isn't just a trick of the light or my eyes being poor. No, this is very, very obvious, and that is quite hard to excuse. I can understand having a bit of trouble centering a knife and holding everything into place and making sure it lines up just right. But there are times when we go beyond just a little nitpick. That is quite noticeable, and it's so far off that I'm actually scared that when I close the knife, it might hit the inside of the liner. And that is where we go into the territory. We venture from cosmetic flaw and enter the realm of simply a flaw that could affect the knife. And one other thing that I would like to remark on, when a knife is off to this side, that's actually less of a problem, because when you put your nail in the nail nick, you're pushing the blade, even just slightly, in this direction. And so because of that, if the blade was too far to this side, when you push it to open it, it would be sent to the other side of the handle, therefore ensuring that it isn't going anywhere near the liner. However, when the blade is off to the very side you would be pushing the blade when opening it, this could happen. See that? The blade is now resting on the liner. And when I try to open it, there's a bit of extra friction. It isn't the worst I've ever seen, and in fact I would be kind as to say it's not actually that bad. I've seen some knives that are terrible when it comes to blade rub, and this is not one of the worst. However, compared to all of the other Michael May knives I have, and I have at this point a collection of 7, this is definitely the worst among them. Comparing it again to my first Lambfoot, again this is featuring the same blade profile and same handle, that's not perfectly centered. And you can actually see there's a gap right there. However, that is still far enough away from either of the liners that I'm not going to be afraid of it scraping. Because when I try to open this knife, even if I push it off a little, that's still not going to hit the liner. But here, that is just significantly worse. And again, if I bring them up side by side here, you can see it more clearly. You've got the one and the other. Again, it's not the end of the world, but if Michael can do this, why would he let that slide? As that is just unfortunate. Again, comparing to a couple other knives of his. Here is the ergonomic. This one, you can see, is actually quite close to perfection. Or perhaps one of my latest ones, this clip point knife. You can see that the blade itself almost seems to curve a little, but if you're measuring simply from where the tip is, that's almost dead center. So I suppose the flaw here is Michael's consistency, and ironic as it may be, my consistent flaw with Michael is his consistency, as it seems he's very much capable of producing knives of outstanding quality within the realm of, well, I'd say better than Case, Ottermesser, probably equivalent, definitely competing with the likes of GEC, especially if you're considering custom knives as opposed to production knives. But when I see things like this and I see that inconsistency, I'm reminded of the early days of Arthur Wright, as that was their problem too. They were able to produce excellent knives for good prices, and then they'd produce knives that are just embarrassing. Now, I think they've gotten past that, and I'm quite happy to recommend many Arthur Wright knives. They could still loosen their springs up a little, I will say that. But this is just unfortunate, and I really hope that this isn't going to become a consistent issue, as when you're a company, you need to be built upon things that people can rely on, I'd say. And if they can't rely on the fact that the knife they just purchased is going to be as good, or even within the same realm as a knife they may have purchased a year earlier, that company needs to change something, as that level of uncertainty for the customer is just not acceptable. And so I understand there might be those that say, I'm blowing this out of proportion. It's just an offset blade. Who cares? Well, I care, first of all. It's my review. I'm allowed to say whatever I want about it. But for the average knife collector, well, average slip joint knife collector, this would be seen as perhaps passable on a Rough Rider for $20, but for a custom knife that is ranging upwards of 80 to 90 pounds, that is not acceptable. And speaking of which, you may have already noticed this, but the other issue, I'd say it's a little bit less annoying, but it definitely is worth mentioning. I said there was no gapping, and that is still true. No gapping with the liner to spring transition. However, on the left side here, I don't know how clear that is, but there is a very noticeable gap in between the liner and the cover. Now, I'm unsure. It's possible that this could have happened after the knife was already finished, but I kind of doubt that, say, dropping the knife, or at one point in transit, it having bumped around a bit would have caused that. That is just ugly. And especially considering, as I've said before, wooden handles swell and shrink with moisture and temperature. Because of that, you may get situations like this Bocote wood here, where the pins arrived perfectly flush, but I think the wood must have shrunk perhaps, and because of that, now the pins, at least the back pin, is raised to the point where you can actually see it, if the camera will ever be so kind as to focus. Any day now. There we are. You can see the pin is raised out from the handle. And yes, you can feel it. So, in cases with natural materials such as this, things like that can happen. And it is good to bear that in mind. But all the more reason, if this did not happen in any ways that could be if this was not natural, is what I'm going for, that is concerning, as if you were to get moisture in between the liner and the cover, that could cause a multitude of problems for the handle, and it's very hard to get moisture out of crevices like that. And so, seeing that that could be a problem if the handle ever got wet, it is just a bit concerning to me. Again, I understand that this is not the worst flaw in the world, and as long as you are keeping your knives away from any moisture, well, you should be all right. But it is still a bit irritating to me. Although that, I think, if you're not paying close attention, you might not notice that. And so I could excuse, perhaps, that being missed in the quality control. But that offset blade I cannot excuse. There is no way you could miss that. And so, I guess that brings me to, what are my final thoughts on this? Well, I will be honest here. There are some things that I'm very happy with. The smoothness of everything, the transitions are brilliant. The covers themselves look gorgeous. I don't know how well the camera can pick them up, but on this side you have a deep brown color here with a nice grain pattern. And on this side you have black with these chocolatey brown streaks. And it's just gorgeous. I really like black palm personally, and I'd be happy to see it on more knives. So stylistically, pairing with the polished brass, this is a gorgeous knife. And the Lambfoot blade lends itself well to everyday carry. I personally enjoy blades like this, and as I already said, my bog oak Lambfoot here is perhaps my most used Michael May knife. So I have no complaints regarding the design of the knife. I think it feels great in the hand and is just a very classy knife to carry. It wouldn't look out of place as an everyday carry item, and at the same time it could be used as more of a gent's knife for nicer occasions. So in that aspect, this knife is excellent. However, the fit and finish, to some may not be a huge issue, but to me, there are some things I cannot justify. Yes, the transitions are excellent. Yes, the handles are beautiful. Yes, it's well sharpened, the nail nick is ground in, it's got the double swedge, the file work is beautiful, the back is seamless, there are no gaps to be found, the spring tension is strong. Yes, these are all good things. But that little gap there, which could lead to issues with moisture in the future, and more importantly, that offset blade, I wouldn't say they ruin the knife for me. I still am happy with this, but I do think that problems like this are problems because one day Michael might send a knife like that out to someone who isn't as forgiving as I am. And I've said before, I do have some sort of strange bias towards knives from Sheffield. I really like Arthur Wright. I find Taylor's Eyewitness to be absolutely outstanding collector's items, and I think Michael May makes some of the best custom knives for the price. But I think that there are those who will expect perfection, and while you can argue day and night as to whether or not demanding perfection at 85 pounds is reasonable, while I don't think you can get a knife that's perfect, you should still try to make sure that they leave the factory, or rather the workshop, I should say, not looking so visibly poor. Because if someone who was considering buying one of these were to see that in the product photos, they would not probably want it then. And yes, there are those that would be fine with it and think that this entire segment of the video is useless as, well, what's wrong with the knife? There's nothing wrong with it. Well, that's fine. And in fact, more power to you, as it is a bit of a curse being a very picky collector, and I think that I probably have it better than many others. Having high standards is also a good thing, and ensuring that you're not spending your money on substandard product it's an honorable thing. But I will say that to any aspiring knife maker, someone who's stocking knives, thinking of going into the trade, or perhaps considering buying a knife like this, it's always good to try to aim for perfection, and even if you can't attain perfection, you will still often end up with something that is excellent. And in the case of this knife, I still think I personally am happy with it. There will be those that will disagree with me, and that is okay. But I've said in pretty much every Michael May knife review I have done, these knives are never perfect. I have never had a perfect knife from Michael in the literal sense. If you define perfection as absolutely flawless with nothing that could be changed, nothing that could be done better, then no, I have never had a perfect knife from him. To me, though, I find that most of his knives are perfect for me. Do they function as good carry knives? Yes. Do they look nice? Yes. Are they made using materials that I enjoy? Absolutely. Are they made in a traditional manner? Yes. Do they absolutely break the bank? No. Are the steels passable? Yes. And so for me, I am happy to buy from Michael, and I think that I don't regret my purchases. Again, I have quite a few knives of his, and I enjoy them. But I do understand that absolutely there will be those that think that his products are substandard. And so for that reason, I will say, before ordering, make sure that you understand the knife you receive is not going to be absolutely perfect. But if you are okay with that, and if you think that a knife doesn't need to be perfect for you to enjoy it, then by all means, look into buying one of Michael's knives. I think that they are unbelievably charming. They're handsome. You can choose a variety of different materials. Again, we have elm, black palm, bocote wood, black walnut, and 3 cases of bog oak because I'm hopelessly addicted to purchasing knives with that material. But either way, I think, all in all, I have hopes for Michael. I think that he has potential and could very well be a great name in the future for Sheffield cutlery, just like Trevor Ablett, just like Stan Shaw, just like Graham Clayton. And because of that, I wish him all the best. I will say, I will continue to critique what I see. And in the case of flaws, such as off-center blades or gapping, yes, I think that these things could be improved upon. And if they are, well, may we celebrate it. But in the meantime, I am happy with this knife, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. I won't say it's my favorite, definitely not. That honor would probably have to go to the Ettrick. But regardless, I very much like these knives. I carry them more than most of the other traditional slip joint knives that I own, and I would still recommend them. If you're looking for a knife with character that still is handmade the old way, and feels very much at home amidst antique knives of the 18 or 1900s, then by all means, I think Michael does a great job at that. The style is timeless. The quality is certainly there for the price. I just think that the consistency could be a little bit better. But there you are. That is really all I have to say on this knife. So, there is the Michael May Lambfoot in black palm wood, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.